The dust followed the battered Ford Ranger like a loyal ghost, a plume of ochre and regret clinging to the tailgate. Inside, Anya Sharma kept her eyes fixed on the heat-shimmering ribbon of asphalt that dissolved into the horizon, her knuckles white on the worn leather of the steering wheel. Beside her, Ghost sat with the placid stillness of a creature who had seen the end of the world and was unimpressed by its reruns. His fur, a salt and pepper cascade of gray and white, was a map of old scars and older campaigns, his ears swiveling to catch sounds Anya's damaged hearing would miss. He was her anchor, the breathing, sentient ballast that kept her from drifting away on the tide of memory. The truck's air conditioning had died somewhere back in Arizona, and the open windows offered no relief, only the hot, sage-scented breath of the Nevada basin. It was a furnace, but it was a clean heat, a purifying fire that felt different from the humid, blood-soaked air that still haunted her lungs. They had been driving for 3 days, fueled by cheap coffee, gas station jerky, and the fading promise of a government surplus auction website. $140. That was the price of a ghost town. Parcel 9120, Serenity Flats, Nevada. A forgotten freckle on a vast, empty map. It was a clerical error, a tax deed sale so absurd she'd clicked by on the county website with the fatalistic certainty of a soldier stepping on a pressure plate. It had felt like the universe offering a final, sardonic joke. For less than the cost of a new set of tires, she could purchase her own oblivion. A place to finally be still. A place where the only ghosts would be the ones she brought with her. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, a message from the only contact she hadn't deleted. Mac, her old spotter. You fall off the grid yet, Sharma? She ignored it. Mac meant well, but his version of help involved VA appointments and support groups, circles of broken people trying to glue their fragments together with shared platitudes. Anya preferred her fragments sharp. They kept the world at a distance. Ghost shifted, his massive head resting on her thigh, his dark, intelligent eyes gazing up at her. He felt the tremor in her hands, the subtle shift in her breathing that signaled the approach of the wolves, the memories that stalked the edges of her consciousness, the scent of diesel and scorched metal, the high-pitched whine of a failing engine, the weight of a friend's body, suddenly too heavy, too still. She reached down, her fingers sinking into the thick ruff of his neck, grounding herself in the solid, living warmth of him. He had been there, too. He had been pulled from the same wreckage, his own handler lost to the same burst of fire and shrapnel. They were two halves of a shattered whole, navigating a world that no longer had a place for them. The road began to degrade, asphalt yielding to gravel, then to a rutted dirt track that climbed into a series of low, sun-scorched hills. According to the GPS, they were close. Serenity Flats. The name was a cruel irony, a promise of something she'd been chasing since the medevac chopper lifted off and the world went silent. The truck crested a final rise, and the valley opened up below them. It was exactly as she'd imagined, a collection of skeletal wooden buildings bleached gray by a century of sun and wind, huddled around a single, wide dirt street. A dead town for a dead woman. Perfect. She could already feel the tension in her shoulders beginning to uncoil. Here, the silence would be real. Here, she could finally stop listening for footsteps that weren't there, for whispers on the wind. She let the truck roll to a stop, the engine ticking in the sudden quiet. Ghost's ears, however, were not still. They were locked forward, rigid, focused on something in the heart of the town. Anya followed his gaze, her eyes scanning the derelict structures, the dead storefronts, the collapsed livery. And then she saw it. A thin, almost invisible tendril of gray smoke, rising from a stone chimney on what looked like an old assayer's office. It was a delicate, deliberate thread, pulling its way into the vast, indifferent blue of the sky. It was a sign of life, a betrayal. Her hand instinctively went to the K-bar knife strapped to her thigh, the worn handle of familiar comfort. The promise of solitude, the one thing she had paid her last dollars for, had just evaporated like a raindrop on the hot desert floor. Ghost let out a low, almost inaudible growl, not of aggression, but of inquiry. What are your orders? Anya took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and disappointment. The plan was already shot. Her perfect, empty world was occupied. For those who understand the search for a quiet corner in a loud world, who know that the deepest battles are often fought in silence. We invite you to follow our journey. There are more stories like this than you know. She left the truck running, the driver's side door hanging open as she moved. Her boots made no sound on the packed earth, a habit ingrained from years of moving through places where sound meant death. Ghost padded beside her, a gray shadow hugging her left leg, his posture a mirror of her own. Alert, economical, every muscle coiled for action. The town was a corpse picked clean by time. The saloon's batwing doors were gone, leaving a gaping mouth that exhaled the smell of dry rot and rodent droppings. The windows of the general store were shattered, the empty shelves inside coated in a thick blanket of dust. Yet, the smoke was undeniable. It curled from a chimney on a small, sturdy-looking building made of river stone and thick timber. The only structure that didn't look like it was one stiff breeze away from total collapse. A single window glowed with a faint, warm light, a beacon of impossible life in this necropolis. Her hand rested on Ghost's head, a silent command to hold. He froze, becoming part of the landscape, his eyes never leaving the source of the smoke. Anya circled, using the husks of the other buildings for cover, her movements fluid and precise. She wasn't an invader. She was a scout, gathering intelligence before making contact. From the side, she could see the back of the stone house. A small, well-tended vegetable garden fought a valiant battle against the arid soil. A clothesline was strung between the house and a gnarled juniper tree, bearing a single faded flannel shirt that danced slowly in the breeze. This wasn't a transient. This was a home. Her claim, the digital receipt from the county auction stored on her phone, felt flimsy and absurd. You couldn't own a place where someone else's heart was already planted. She felt a familiar bitterness rise in her throat. Nothing was ever as advertised. Not peace, not honor, not even an empty patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere. She completed her circuit and returned to the front, deciding a direct approach was the only option left. This wasn't a tactical problem. It was a human one, and those were always messy. She walked into the open, her hands kept deliberately away from her knife, visible and empty. As she approached the stone house, the front door creaked open. An old man emerged, stepping into the slanted light of the late afternoon. He was as weathered as the town itself, his face a roadmap of deep creases, a wild mane of white hair, and a beard that fell to his chest. He held a heavy-bore shotgun, but he held it loosely, the barrel pointed at the ground in a gesture that was more caution than threat. "Can I help you?" His voice was gravelly, like stones grinding together. Anya stopped about 20 feet away, giving him space. Ghost remained at her side, a silent, imposing statue. "This is Serenity Flats?" she asked, her own voice rough from disuse. The man nodded slowly, his pale blue eyes taking in her dusty clothes, the military-grade pack on her back, the disciplined stillness of the dog. "Has been for 100 years. Still is, the county had it listed for auction," Anya stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "Parcel 9120, the old man's face tightened. A flicker of something, anger, or maybe fear, crossed his features before being buried under a lifetime of stoicism. "The county says a lot of things. Doesn't make 'em true. The county ain't been out here in 50 years, he gestured vaguely with the shotgun. "This here's my place. Name's Elias, Anya," she replied, offering nothing more. An impasse. The sun beat down, the silence stretching between them, thick and heavy. She could push it. She had the deed, flimsy as it felt. She could call the sheriff in the next county over, create a storm of bureaucracy that would inevitably, eventually, prove her right. But she looked at Elias, at the way he stood his ground, a lonely sentinel guarding a forgotten kingdom, and she saw a reflection of her own stubborn desire to be left alone. She was tired of fighting. That's why she'd come here. Ghost, sensing the tension ease, took a half-step forward and sat, a clear signal of non-aggression. Elias's eyes flickered down to the dog. "That a shepherd?" "Yes, he looks like he's seen a thing or two. We both have," Anya said. The old man seemed to consider this. He finally leaned the shotgun against the doorframe. "You look beat. The sun's a killer out here if you're not used to it. There's a well behind the old hotel. Water's clean. Pump still works. It was an offering. A truce." "Thank you," Anya said. She gave Elias a slight nod and turned, walking toward the skeletal remains of the hotel. As she passed a collapsed blacksmith shop, she saw them, a woman with dark, wary eyes, standing in the doorway of a small shack, a young boy half hidden behind her skirts. Further down, a man with grease-stained hands paused his work on a sputtering generator to watch her pass. Elias wasn't alone. The ghost town was inhabited by a small tribe of phantoms, people living so far off the grid they had ceased to exist to the outside world. Her property, her sanctuary, her mistake. The weight of it settled on her, heavier than her pack. She had bought a town, only to find it wasn't for sale. Anya chose a cabin on the far western edge of the town, set back against a low mesa that offered a commanding view of the single dusty street and the valley beyond. It was little more than a one-room shack, the roof sagging and the floorboards warped, but the four walls were mostly intact. It provided cover and a defensible position. Old habits died hard. She spent the first hour clearing it out, sweeping away a decade of dust and debris with a broken piece of siding, her movements economical and efficient. Ghost explored the perimeter, his nose to the ground, mapping the sense of this new territory, his presence a silent declaration that this small patch of desolation was now under their protection. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, a storm gathered in the east, the clouds bruised and heavy. The wind picked up, whispering through the broken buildings, making the dead town moan and sigh like a restless spirit. It was a reflection of the tempest inside her own head. The plan had been simple: solitude, silence, and the slow, grinding work of building a new life from the wreckage of the old. Now there were people, complications, witnesses. She watched them from her new perch. Elias sat on his porch, sharpening a knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape carrying on the wind. The woman, whose name she'd later learn was Maria, was calling her son, Leo, back to their small, tidy cabin. The boy, maybe 5 or 6, chased a lizard into the sagebrush, his laughter a strange, alien sound in the profound quiet. Jed, the mechanic, finally coaxed the generator to life, and a string of bare bulbs flickered on, casting a small pool of defiant, golden light in the encroaching darkness. They weren't ghosts. They were a community, fragile and forgotten, clinging to life on the edge of the world. Anya felt like an intruder, an unwanted variable in their delicate equation for survival. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, kicking up the scent of dust and creosote. Ghost came to the cabin door and nudged her hand, his intelligent eyes looking first at her, then toward the small family's cabin. Anya understood. The boy, Leo, had been watching them all afternoon, his curiosity warring with his shyness. He was fascinated by Ghost. The dog seemed to sense that the boy was the key to this place, the soft point in its defenses. "Stay," Anya commanded softly, but Ghost whined, a low, insistent sound. He wasn't asking for permission to approach. He was telling her it was necessary. Trust the dog. It was the first rule she had relearned after everything else had been burned away. With a sigh, she relented. Ghost trotted out into the rain, not directly toward the boy, but in a wide, casual arc, pretending to be interested in a scent near their cabin. Leo, who had been retreating inside, stopped in the doorway to watch. The big dog sat down, about 30 feet away, and tilted his head, a disarming, gentle gesture. Slowly, Leo took a step out, his mother watching warily from behind him. Ghost didn't move. He simply waited, a patient ambassador. The boy took another step, and another, until he was just a few feet away. He reached out a small, hesitant hand. Ghost leaned forward, just enough to let the boy's fingers brush the top of his head, and then he licked the boy's hand, a single, gentle swipe of his tongue. A fragile treaty was signed. Maria stepped out onto her porch, a threadbare cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders. "He doesn't bite?" she asked, her voice soft but clear over the sound of the rain. "Only on command," Anya replied, walking slowly to the edge of her own territory. "His name is Ghost. It fits this place," Maria said, a sad smile touching her lips. "I'm Maria. This is Leo." The boy, emboldened, was now stroking Ghost's back, his initial fear forgotten. "You're the one who bought the town," Maria stated. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast, even with only 4 souls to carry it. "There was a mistake," Anya said. "It was listed as abandoned." Maria's gaze drifted over the decaying street. To most people it is. We're just leftover. Elias was born here. Jed came after the mines closed, had nowhere else to go. I came here to get away. She didn't elaborate, and Anya didn't ask. Everyone out here had a story they were running from. We don't have much, Maria continued, a defensive edge to her voice. But we make do. We don't want any trouble. I'm not here to make trouble, Anya said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. Her anger at the broken promise of solitude was being replaced by a weary sort of empathy. She was looking at a different kind of veteran, survivors of a different kind of war. The storm broke then, the rain coming down in a driving sheet, turning the dust to mud. Maria called Leo inside, and Anya retreated to her cabin, Ghost trotting happily at her heels. She sat in the darkness, listening to the rain drum on the tin roof, a sound that had always brought her a measure of peace. She wasn't alone, and for the first time in a long time, the thought didn't bring with it a surge of panic, but a flicker of something else, something she couldn't quite name. The next morning, the desert was washed clean, the air crisp and cool, the sky a piercing, cloudless blue. The storm had passed, leaving a deceptive tranquility in its wake. Anya spent the day reinforcing her cabin, patching the roof with salvaged tin and securing the door with a new hinge she fashioned from a piece of scrap metal. It was methodical work, the kind that occupied her hands and quieted her mind. She worked with a focused intensity, ignoring the dull ache in her shoulder and the louder ache in her soul. She was aware of the town's other inhabitants observing her from a distance, their curiosity tempered by caution. She was still an unknown quantity, a disruption to their fragile ecosystem. Late in the afternoon, the sound began, a low, mechanical hum from the east, growing steadily louder. It was the wrong kind of sound for this place, too clean, too powerful. It wasn't Jed's sputtering generator or her own aging truck. Ghost heard it too, his head snapping up, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. Anya moved to the edge of the mesa, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her knife as she scanned the horizon. A plume of dust, far cleaner and more defined than the one her own truck had made, was rising from the dirt track that served as the town's only entrance. A few minutes later, the vehicle came into view. It was a brand-new, gloss-black SUV, the kind that belonged in a corporate parking garage in a city of glass and steel. It looked obscene here, a predator that had wandered into the wrong territory. The SUV rolled to a stop in the center of town, its tinted windows hiding its occupants. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was more menacing than the noise had been. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and thin, dressed in a tailored gray suit that seemed immune to the dust and heat. He wore expensive sunglasses, and his smile was a bloodless slash in a pale, angular face. He moved with an unearned confidence, an air of ownership that set every one of Anya's nerves on edge. Elias had emerged from his house, the shotgun once again in his hands. Jed had shut off the generator and was standing by his workshop, a heavy wrench held loosely at his side. Maria pulled Leo behind her, her body a shield. The man in the suit surveyed the scene with an expression of mild amusement, as if observing the quaint customs of a primitive tribe. "Quaint," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "A real slice of the Old West. I'm afraid playtime is over." However, he pulled a tablet from a slim briefcase. "My name is Thorne. I represent the Aethel Mining Corporation. According to our records, which are far more accurate than whatever passes for a filing system in the local county office, Aethel has acquired the mineral rights for this entire valley. That includes this parcel." He looked directly at Elias. "You and the rest of these residents are trespassing on corporate property. I'm here to give you the courtesy of a formal notice. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." Elias spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "This land's been in my family since the Silver Strike. No corporation's got a claim on it." Thorne's smile didn't waver. "Sentimental, but legally irrelevant. The land was declared derelict and abandoned. Aethel purchased it legally. Your presence here is a liability we are not prepared to assume." He then turned his gaze, and it landed on Anya as she walked down from the mesa, Ghost at her side. His eyes swept over her, dismissing her as just another piece of the local squalor. "And you must be the other complication. The one who snagged the surface deed in the auction." He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "A clever bit of bottom feeding, I'll admit. But the surface rights are meaningless without access, and the access roads are now Ethel property. Your deed is worthless. Anya stopped next to Elias, her presence a silent statement of solidarity. She met Thorne's gaze, her expression unreadable. This town isn't empty, she said, her voice flat and cold. Thorne finally took off his sunglasses, his eyes small and reptilian. He was seeing her for the first time, not as a squatter, but as something else. He noted the way she stood, the coiled readiness in her posture, the professional calm of the dog at her side. That is a temporary situation, he said, his voice losing some of its silky condescension and gaining a sharper, harder edge. 48 hours. After that, we will be bringing in equipment to clear the area. I strongly advise you and your neighbors not to be in the way when it arrives. He put his sunglasses back on. The conversation, in his mind, concluded. He got back into his SUV, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud. The engine started, and the vehicle turned around, disappearing down the track in another cloud of arrogant dust. The silence it left behind was heavy with dread. The fragile piece of Serenity Flats had been shattered. Anya looked at the faces of the others, Elias's grim fury, Jed's worried scowl, Maria's quiet terror. She had come here seeking an escape from war, only to find that the war had followed her. The enemy just wore a different uniform. The pristine dust cloud from Thorne's SUV had barely settled before Anya's mind shifted into a familiar, cold calculus. The terrain had changed. The mission was no longer about personal peace. It was about survival. A defense. She looked at the small, frightened group of people and felt the unwelcome, long-dormant mantle of leadership settle on her shoulders. He'll be back, she said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Elias nodded, his knuckles white on the stock of his shotgun. Men like that, they always come back. Maria hugged Leo tighter, her face pale. What can we do? We have nowhere to go. That was the crux of it. They were cornered. For Anya, leaving was an option, a bitter pill she could swallow. She could pack her truck and drive away, find another patch of nowhere. But for them, this was the end of the line. Leaving meant being scattered to the winds, becoming ghosts in a world that had already forgotten them. The thought of turning her back on them left a taste like ash in her mouth. It was the same feeling she'd had in the moments before the ambush, the sickening premonition of failure, of letting her people down. First, we learn what we're up against, Anya announced, her voice taking on a new tone of command. She walked to her truck and pulled out a small, rugged case. Inside was a satellite phone and a solar charger. It was her one lifeline to the world she'd tried to leave behind, a tool for emergencies. This, she decided, qualified. She dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before Mac answered. Sharma? I was about to file a missing persons report with the VFW, he said, his voice a welcome piece of the past. I need a favor, Mac. No questions asked, for you? Anything. Shoot, a company. Aethel Mining Corporation, she said, spelling the name. I need to know everything. Who they are, what they do, and why they'd be interested in a worthless piece of rock in the Nevada desert. And I need it fast, Ethel. That's a big fish, Anya. Heavy hitters. Private security, lawyers on retainer that eat other lawyers for breakfast. You sure you want to poke that bear? The bear's already poked me, she said. Just get me the intel, you got it. I'll start digging. Be careful, Sharma. The line went dead. Anya turned back to the others. He's buying time, she said, referring to Thorne. 48 hours is a courtesy, but it's also a tactical window. He wants us to scatter. It's cleaner for him if we run. She began to pace, her eyes scanning the town, but she wasn't seeing dilapidated buildings anymore. She was seeing fields of fire, choke points, cover, and concealment. What are our assets? She asked, the question directed at the group. Elias, Jed, and Maria looked at her, then at each other, confused. Assets. Jed grunted. I got a generator that works most of the time and a 78 Chevy that ain't moved since Bush was in office. That's a start. Anya said, her mind already working. Elias, you were born here. You know this land better than anyone, the old man nodded. Every rock, every ditch. Know the old silver mines, too. Tunnels run all under this valley. Most are collapsed, but not all. Anya's eyes lit up. Tunnels, subterranean movement. A classic force multiplier. Maria? Maria looked down, shaking her head. I can cook. I can patch clothes. I'm not a fighter. Can you shoot? Anya asked, her tone gentle but firm. Maria hesitated. My father taught me to hunt. I have an old 30-30. For coyotes, good, Anya said. A rifle is a rifle. Marksmanship is a perishable skill, but it doesn't disappear. We'll see what you remember. She looked from face to face, her gaze steady. Thorne thinks we're soft targets. A handful of squatters he can sweep aside. We need to convince him he's wrong. We're not going to fight his army. We're going to make it so costly for him to take this place that he decides it's not worth the price. We're going to become ghosts. Haunt our own home. For the first time since the SUV had arrived, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in their eyes. It was a fragile, defiant spark of hope. Anya felt it too. The emptiness inside her, the vast, silent crater left by the war, was being filled with something new. Purpose. She was no longer just hiding. She was defending. The mission had found her, even in the middle of nowhere. The next 36 hours were a blur of focused activity. Under Anya's quiet direction, the small band of outcasts transformed Serenity Flats from a forgotten relic into a prepared defensive position. She didn't bark orders like a drill sergeant. She spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining the logic behind each task, her military expertise translating the complex language of asymmetrical warfare into simple, practical actions. Jed, the grizzled mechanic, proved to be a master of improvisation. Guided by Anya, he rigged a series of distractions using salvaged parts. Car batteries were wired to floodlights positioned in empty buildings, all connected to a central switchboard in his workshop. He created noisemakers from scrap metal and old engine parts, designed to be triggered by tripwires. We're not trying to fool them into thinking we're an army, Anya explained as they ran the wires. We're trying to create chaos, confusion, make them second-guess what they're seeing and hearing. In the dark, the mind fills in the blanks, usually with the worst-case scenario, Elias, meanwhile, became their cartographer of the underworld. He led Anya into the cool, dark mouth of the old silver mine behind his house. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and minerals. With a pair of powerful flashlights, they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. Elias pointed out stable passages, dead ends, and vertical shafts that opened up into the cellars of the town's old buildings, the saloon, the hotel, even the back of the general store. It was a hidden network, a way to move unseen from one end of the town to the other. They'll come down the main road, expecting us to be holed up in our houses, Anya murmured, her voice echoing in the darkness. We won't be. We'll be everywhere and nowhere. Maria, to her own surprise, found that the skills her father had taught her came back quickly. Anya took her to the mesa overlooking the town and set up targets, old cans and bottles. After a few shaky shots, Maria's breathing evened out, her grip firmed, and she began hitting the targets with consistent accuracy. Anya didn't just teach her how to shoot. She taught her how to observe, how to use a scope, not just for aiming, but for gathering information. You'll be our eyes, Anya told her, positioning her in a concealed spot on the ridge. You're not here to fight. You're here to watch. You will be my voice on the radio, telling me where they are, how many, what they're carrying. Information is more valuable than ammunition. She gave Maria one of a pair of small, rugged walkie-talkies. The other she clipped to her own belt. Amidst the preparations, the deadline arrived. The 48 hours elapsed with the setting of the sun on the second day. The air grew thick with anticipation. The small group gathered in Elias's stone house, the mood tense and somber. Leo was asleep in the back room, blissfully unaware. Jed cleaned an old revolver, his movements methodical. Elias stared into the fire, the shotgun across his lap. Maria nervously checked her rifle for the 10th time. Anya stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky, ghost a silent presence at her side. Her satellite phone buzzed. It was Mac. I've got something for you, Sharma, he said, his voice tight. Aethel's M.O. is ugly. They specialize in hostile acquisitions in remote areas. They find a resource, use legal loopholes to get the land, and then clear it using a subsidiary company. A security firm called BlackRock Strategic Solutions, ex-military, mostly. Mercenaries, for all intents and purposes. They're not known for their gentle touch. They create a problem, then solve it, quietly, So Thorne's visit was just the opening move, Anya said. He was hoping you'd all scare easily. When you don't, Mac continued, they escalate. Local law enforcement is usually paid to look the other way. It'll be your word against theirs, and you're off the books. You don't exist, the pieces clicked into place. The absurdly low price for the town. The immediate arrival of Thorne. It wasn't a mistake, it was a trap, and her purchase had sprung it prematurely. Thanks, Mac. Keep a channel open. Anya, listen to me. This isn't some bar fight. These guys are professionals. Get out of there, negative, Mac, she said softly. I'm holding my ground. She hung up and turned to the others. They'll come tonight, she said. They'll come in the dark, and they'll be quiet. They expect to find sleeping squatters. They're not going to find what they're looking for. She laid a hand-drawn map of the town on Elias's table. Positions, she said, her voice dropping into the familiar cadence of a mission briefing. We do this right. We all walk away. The fear in the room was palpable, but it was now overlaid with something else, a grim resolve. They were no longer just victims waiting for the inevitable. They were a unit, and Anya was their commander. The sun dipped below the western mountains, and the world dissolved into shades of gray and black. A sliver of moon offered little comfort, hiding behind a veil of high, thin clouds. The desert, which had been a place of potential peace, now felt like an ambush waiting to happen. An oppressive silence fell over Serenity Flats, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind through skeletal buildings. Anya moved through the darkness like a wraith, ghost a deeper shadow at her side. She checked on each of her small company, her voice a low murmur in their earpieces. Maria, what's your status? In position, came the whispered reply, a little shaky but clear. I can see the main track for about a mile. Nothing moving, Jed, systems check, all green. Ready to light him up and make some noise when you give the word, Elias, you with me? Right behind you, girl. Know these tunnels better in the back of my own hand. Anya and Elias slipped into the mine entrance, the cool, subterranean air a welcome relief from the tense atmosphere outside. They moved without lights, their hands trailing along the rough-hewn walls, their feet sure on the uneven ground from the afternoon's reconnaissance. Ghost was their guide, his superior senses cutting through the absolute blackness. His body language, the subtle shifts in his posture, the angle of his ears, communicated everything Anya needed to know. They were a single weapon system, honed by years of trust and shared trauma. An hour passed, then two. The waiting was always the hardest part. It was when the ghosts of the past came visiting. Anya pushed them away, focusing on the present. The feel of the cold rock under her hand, the soft padding of Ghost's paws, the sound of Elias's steady breathing behind her. This wasn't then. This was now. Anya. Maria's voice crackled, sharp with adrenaline. I have them. 2 vehicles, no lights. Moving slow. I count. 6. No. 8 figures getting out. They're blacked out. Long guns. Spreading into a tactical formation. Copy that, Maria. Stay hidden. Keep talking to me. Anya replied, her own voice calm, betraying none of the ice that flooded her veins. 8 men. Professionals, just as Mac had warned. This wasn't an eviction notice. It was an assault team. She and Elias moved deeper into the tunnels, heading for a pre-planned junction beneath the center of town. They're at the edge of the street now, Maria reported, moving in 2 teams of 4, one on each side of the street. Methodical, sweeping toward the houses, let them come in. Anya whispered into her mic. Let them get comfortable. The mercs moved with disciplined efficiency, using hand signals, their movements economical and silent. They were hunters, expecting to find sleeping prey. They bypassed Anya's cabin and Jed's workshop, focusing on the 2 occupied houses, Elias's and Maria's. The lead man on the right side team reached Elias's front door, another man stacking up behind him, ready for a dynamic entry. Now, Jed, Anya commanded. Instantly, the generator roared to life, and the string of bare bulbs Jed had rigged along the main street flickered on, bathing the area in a harsh, inconsistent light. Simultaneously, a floodlight inside the empty saloon clicked on, silhouetting the team on the left. The mercs froze for a split second, their night vision goggles washing out in the sudden glare. In that same second, one of Jed's noisemakers, a series of metal plates vibrated by a small engine, clattered to life from inside the general store, a terrifying, inhuman racket that echoed through the town. Confusion reigned. The teams broke formation, seeking cover, shouting into their own radios. "Maria, where's their leader?" Anya asked. "Man in the back, not moving with the teams. Directing them. He's near the old blacksmith shop." "Got it." Anya and Elias had reached the ladder leading up to the saloon cellar. "Elias, you know what to do. Create a diversion on the east side." "Ghost, with me." Elias nodded and disappeared down a side tunnel. Anya climbed the ladder, Ghost scrambling up effortlessly behind her. She cracked the cellar door, peering into the saloon. The two mercs who had been silhouetted were now using the building for cover, their backs to her. She slipped out, a shadow among shadows. She moved with a lethal grace, closing the distance. The first man was focused on the street, trying to make sense of the chaos. He never saw her. Anya's arm snaked around his throat, cutting off his air, while her other hand relieved him of his rifle. She dragged him back into the darkness of an alley, a zip tie from her pocket securing his hands in a swift, practiced motion. The second man turned as he heard the scuffle, but Ghost was already there, a blur of gray fur. He didn't bark. He didn't bite. He hit the man's chest with the full force of his 75 pounds, knocking him off his feet, his head cracking against the wooden wall. He was out cold. 2 down. 6 to go. The element of surprise was gone, but it had been replaced by something better, fear. The hunters were now the hunted. The controlled chaos Anya had unleashed had its intended effect. The remaining mercenaries, trained for conventional combat, were now operating in an environment that made no sense. Lights flickered from unexpected places. Unearthly noises erupted from empty buildings. Their professional cohesion began to fracture, replaced by the uncertainty of men who realized they have walked into a well-laid trap. From her concealed position on the ridge, Maria was a steady, invaluable source of intelligence. 2 moving toward the generator. "They think it's the command center," she whispered over the radio. "Copy," Anya replied. "Jed, you ready?" "Born ready," came the gruff response. The 2 mercs approached the workshop cautiously. As they rounded the corner, a hidden speaker Jed had salvaged from an old radio blared the sound of a shotgun racking, amplified to a deafening level. Both men flinched, dropping to a knee, raising their rifles toward the empty doorway. In that moment of distraction, Jed, hidden in the shadows of his disabled Chevy, triggered his second surprise, a repurposed fire extinguisher, rigged to a valve, that sprayed a thick cloud of C02 at their feet, mimicking a smoke grenade and chilling the air. They scrambled back, disoriented, shouting about gas. It was enough. The diversion gave Anya the window she needed. She was moving along the rooftops now, having scaled the back of the general store. She moved with the low, fluid grace of a predator, her stolen rifle held at the ready. She spotted the 2 mercs who had been advancing on Maria's cabin. They were using a collapsed wagon for cover, their attention divided between the house and the cacophony erupting from the center of town. Anya sighted down the rifle's scope. She wasn't aiming for a kill shot. Her mission was not to create bodies. It was to neutralize the threat, to break their will to fight. She aimed for the lead man's weapon. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The round struck the mercenary's rifle just below the stock, shattering the polymer and sending splinters into his hand. He screamed, dropping the useless weapon. His partner, startled, fired a blind burst toward the rooftop, the bullets thudding into the old wood well wide of the mark. But Anya was already gone, melting back into the shadows. 4 down, 4 to go, she murmured into her mic. "Maria, update on the leader, still at the blacksmith's. He's on his radio, he's angry. The other 2 are with him." They're regrouping. At that moment, a new sound echoed from the east side of town. A loud crash followed by Elias's enraged yell, a performance worthy of a seasoned actor. "Get off my land, you claim jumping rats." The 3 mercs at the blacksmith shop instinctively turned toward the new threat. It was the opening Anya had been waiting for. She dropped down from the roof into the alley behind the saloon, Ghost landing silently beside her. They began a flanking maneuver, using the dark side of the street for cover. The leader, Thorne's chief of security, was trying to restore order. "Forget the old man. All units, converge on me. Form a perimeter," he yelled into his comms. He was a professional trying to apply conventional tactics to an unconventional battlefield. A fatal mistake. Anya and Ghost slipped into the blacksmith shop through a gaping hole in the back wall. The interior was a maze of rusted equipment and debris. Through the front opening, she could see the 3 remaining mercs, their backs to her, focused on the sounds Elias was making. The leader stood in the middle, barking orders. The other 2 were his personal guard. She gave Ghost a silent hand signal. The one on the right. Ghost moved, not a direct charge, but a silent, circling path through the shadows. Anya took a deep breath and stepped out of the darkness. "Looking for me?" she asked, her voice calm and even. The leader and the man on the left spun around, startled. They raised their rifles, but they were too slow. Anya fired twice, 2 precise shots. Not at their chests, but at their thighs. The heavy rounds were designed to tumble on impact. Both men went down, screaming in pain and surprise, their injuries debilitating but not life-threatening. The third man, the one on the right, heard the commotion and turned, but as he did, Ghost exploded from the shadows, latching onto his gun arm. The man shrieked, his rifle clattering to the ground as he tried to fight off the furious animal. It was over in seconds. The leader lay on the ground, clutching his leg, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. "Who the hell are you?" he spat. Anya walked over and kicked his radio away. "I'm the complication," she said. She looked around at the scene. 8 professional mercenaries, neutralized by 1 woman, 1 dog, and 3 terrified civilians who had refused to break. She keyed her mic. "Maria, Jed, Elias. Stand down." The fight's over. A wave of exhaustion, held at bay by adrenaline, washed over her. She had done it. She had protected her people. But she knew the man who had sent these soldiers was still out there. The head of the snake was still attached. The aftermath of the brief, intense conflict was a tableau of surreal stillness. The harsh lights from Jed's contraptions cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating the groaning, zip-tied mercenaries scattered around the town. Elias emerged from the east, looking pleased with his theatrical performance. Jed walked out of his workshop, wrench in hand, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Maria, guided by Anya's all-clear, made her way down from the ridge, her rifle held tightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. They converged in the center of the street, a strange and unlikely platoon surveying their victory. The mercenary leader, his leg crudely bandaged by Anya with a strip of his own tactical shirt, glared up at her from the dust. "You're all dead," he hissed, his voice thick with pain and venom. "Mr. Thorne will bury this place. He'll bury all of you." Anya ignored him. She took the man's satellite phone and found the last number dialed. "Thorne." She hit redial. It was answered on the first ring. "Is it done?" Thorne's voice was slick and confident. "Not quite," Anya said, her voice a blade of ice. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the arrogance being replaced by cold calculation. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Thorne said, his tone shifting, becoming dangerously smooth. "My security team was merely meant to secure the perimeter. Your team is secure," Anya replied. "They've been detained after launching an unprovoked, armed assault on private property. An assault which, by the way, I have on video. It was a bluff, but a good one. I also have your chief of security, who is surprisingly talkative now that he's facing federal weapons and assault charges." The leader cursed at her from the ground. "Whatever you think you've accomplished, you've only made things worse for yourself," Thorne threatened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, and you have no idea who you're dealing with," Anya countered. "I'm a citizen on my own property, defending my home against 8 armed trespassers. That's a story the media will love, especially when my friend from the Defense Intelligence Agency provides them with your company's track record of illegal acquisitions. Max Intel was her ace in the hole." Another long pause. Thorne was weighing his options, cutting his losses. "What do you want?" he finally asked, the words clipped, tasting like defeat. "You will call off your dogs. Permanently," Anya stated. "You will cede any and all claims to Parcel 9120 and the surrounding buffer zone. Your fraudulent claim at the county office will be withdrawn by morning. You will pay for the medical transport of your injured men. And you will never, ever come back here. If I see so much as a corporate survey drone over this valley, I will release everything I have to every news agency and federal prosecutor I can find. She could feel his fury radiating through the phone. This is not over, he vowed. Yes, Anya said. It is. She ended the call. She then dialed Mac. I need a cleanup crew, Mac. And a lawyer. The next hour was a blur. Guided by Mac's instructions, Anya used the captured mercenary sat phone to make an anonymous call to a state police barracks 2 counties over, reporting an incident involving illegal firearms and multiple injuries at a remote, abandoned mining town. She gave them the coordinates and nothing else. The response would be slow, but it would be official. As the first hint of dawn began to soften the eastern sky, the residents of Serenity Flats gathered once more in Elias's house. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a profound sense of disbelief. They had faced down a monster and won. He'll be back, Jed said, voicing the fear they all felt. Men like that don't just walk away, he won't. Anya said with a certainty that surprised even herself. We beat him on the ground, and we beat him on the information front. He can't afford the exposure. We're more trouble than we're worth. She looked at the faces around the table. Elias, Jed, Maria, with Leo now sleeping soundly on her lap. They were no longer just strangers she'd stumbled upon. They were her unit. She had fought for them. The thought didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an anchor. Ghost, who had been resting at her feet, got up and walked over to Maria, resting his great head on her knee, next to the sleeping child. It was a gesture of profound comfort, of guardianship. Anya watched the interaction, and a crack appeared in the armor she had worn for so long. Through it, a strange and unfamiliar warmth began to seep in. She had come to this desolate place seeking to lose herself in solitude, to finally silence the echoes of a past she couldn't outrun. But instead of an ending, she had found a new beginning. She had found a new mission, not in a foreign desert fighting for reasons that had long since turned to dust, but here, in her own backyard, fighting for something real. A home, a family, a small, fragile pocket of serenity in a world full of noise. Months bled into a year. The seasons turned, painting the high desert in the muted tones of survival and endurance. The violent night of the confrontation with Aethel's mercenaries became a story, a legend whispered among the 4 adult residents of Serenity Flats, a testament to their improbable victory. True to Anya's prediction, Thorne and his corporation vanished. The county records were quietly amended, the fraudulent claims erased, and Parcel 9120 was left alone. Mac had connected them with a public interest law firm out of Reno. A young, fiercely idealistic lawyer took their case pro bono, arguing that through decades of continuous, open occupation, Elias and the others had a claim to their homes under the principle of adverse possession. Anya's ownership of the overarching parcel, ironically, became the legal shield that protected them all. The town, once a symbol of decay, began to show subtle signs of rebirth. Jed, using parts salvaged from the mercenaries' abandoned vehicles, built a small but efficient wind turbine, providing consistent power to the small community. The generator's sputtering roar was replaced by the quiet whir of blades turning in the desert wind. Maria, her confidence growing, expanded the small garden into a thriving patch of green, cultivating enough vegetables to feed them all. With a surplus, she learned to can and preserve. Leo, no longer a shy, fearful boy, treated the entire town as his personal playground, with Ghost as his constant, watchful companion. Elias, the town's patriarch, seemed to have shed 20 years. He taught Leo the names of the desert plants, the tracks of the animals, and the stories of the stars, passing down the wisdom of a lifetime spent in this quiet corner of the world. And Anya, the reluctant catalyst, found herself slowly, painstakingly, building a life. She repaired her cabin, making it a tight, comfortable home. She established a perimeter of watchfulness, not out of fear, but out of a sense of duty. She was the guardian, the sentinel. Her days were filled with the simple, grounding rhythms of physical labor and quiet companionship. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent now, their sharp edges worn smooth by the reality of her new life. The ghosts of her past were still there, but they were joined by new, living spirits who depended on her. One crisp autumn evening, she sat on her porch, cleaning the .30-30 rifle that now belonged more to the town than to any one person. Ghost lay at her feet, his head on his paws, his eyes tracking the flight of a hawk against the sunset-painted sky. The others were gathered around a fire pit in the center of town, their laughter and conversation carrying on the cool air. Maria was telling a story. Jed was arguing good-naturedly with Elias about the best way to fix a water pump. Leo was chasing moths at the edge of the firelight. It was a picture of perfect, ordinary peace. A peace she had earned not by running, but by standing her ground. She had come here seeking emptiness, a void to match the one inside her. But the universe, in its infinite and often cruel wisdom, had given her the opposite. It had given her fullness, a purpose, a people to protect, a reason to face the dawn. She thought back to the $140 she had spent on a digital whim, a desperate, last-ditch effort to buy her own disappearance. It was the best investment she had ever made. It had bought her more than a piece of worthless land. It had bought her a chance at redemption. It had bought her a home. A community of ghosts had brought her back to life. Mac called sometimes, checking in. He'd told her the federal investigation into Aethel Mining was gaining traction, thanks to the evidence she'd provided. Her small act of defiance had sent ripples out into the wider world. "You started a war, Sharma," he'd said on their last call, a note of admiration in his voice. "No," she'd replied, looking out at the quiet street of her town. "I just finished one." As darkness finally fell, blanketing the valley in a profound and welcome silence, Anya finished her work. She leaned the rifle against the cabin wall and looked out at the small circle of firelight, at her family. She was not the same woman who had arrived here, brittle and broken. The scars were still there, inside and out, but they no longer defined her. They were simply a part of her history, a reminder of the price of peace. Ghost got to his feet, stretched, and nudged her hand, his silent way of asking if everything was okay. She sank her fingers into his thick fur, the familiar feel of him a constant reassurance. "Everything's okay, buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she was no longer afraid to feel. "We're home, for those who believe that home is not a place you find, but a place you build, and that family is not just blood, but the people you choose to fight for. This story is for you." Join us again as we continue to explore the quiet corners where the forgotten find their voice and the lost find their way.